Hello, book lovers. I am Phil Svitek, joined alongside Marisa Serafini. And even though it is still technically September, we are at the tail end. And so we are discussing today Hocus Pocus and the all new sequel. Yes, that is the official title of the book. So we're going to get into all that stuff. Just a few sort of not necessarily housekeeping items, but just, you know, we're going to assume that you've read the book in that way. Or if not, hey, it's going to be spoiled. So just know that right up front. And as the title implies, yes, it is based off of the movie that came out. And so it's a novelization and the all new sequel. But I have to know, and we'll talk about it more, it is different than the Disney Plus sequel.
Yes.
So, know that. But, just before I get Marissa into your overall thoughts, I just want to say, it's a light, easy, fun thing that I felt like we would just have a blast talking about, even if the writing isn't necessarily the best. But it's fun enough, right? Like it's good enough to make it work. So, with that said, Marissa, what did you think of Hocus Pocus and the all new sequel?
I mean, honestly, Phil, I have to praise you because I think you just know me too well. Knowing I love Hocus Pocus the film. Considering years ago we did a movie review on it, and now we're doing the book review. So I was so all in for this one. What was exciting is that I don't think the writing was bad. It actually added padding to like the scenes that we already know. It added I could you say more character development maybe, but you could say like more development in relationships between each other, whether that be Danny to Max or Max to Allison. They're just more like chemistry um building in that sense for character development. And like I enjoyed it as like when you said last time when you're reading, the first movie, quote unquote, the first story, you are playing it in your head, and like I totally don't mind that. And I do have to admit, when I started this book, I was like 60 pages in, I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely like replaying it in my mind. But I actually stopped and fast forwarded to part two. I was like, I already know this story, so let me just get to the sequel part that I don't know yet. I was kind of more excited to read that first. So I kind of read this book out of order, not gonna lie, but it all made sense and I loved it. I can't wait to dive into it.
Yeah, so we'll take it in two parts, as is the book. So let's start with the first part, which is very heavily based on the movie. And as you mentioned, I do believe that it deepens the character motivations. We know why Max was rowdy in class, and it takes some liberties where it doesn't start. The movie itself starts with like the prologue, and then we cut to the classroom scene, whereas the book is much more. It cuts back and forth, and we get Max a little bit before his day really begins, and that's where the infatuation with Allison does already come in. So we're playing into that. And yeah, I thought expanded stuff. And then the only other major thing is it intertwined sort of the basis for what will come in the sequel, aka that the Sandersons have this unknown sister,
Right.
Elizabeth Sanderson. So that's like a major change through it. But yeah, as far as obviously you visualized it, but I'm curious to know your like you mentioned you like the additive stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of helps with the pacing along too, because if you're just gonna go like basically throughout the movie, movie has a condensed schedule and things are usually more expedited when it comes to character development, relationship development. So when we got the scenes between Allison and Max flirting with each other, you can also see like also more scenes added onto that we don't see as visuals. You can see the like they've been eyeing each other for a while. It's not just like one day kind of infatuation. It was like, oh no, Max has been there for a couple weeks now, and Allison has noticed him in other classes, and so it's like we see more of those kind of scenes where like, oh no, they've been interested in each other for a while, and then once Max finally, like gets the courage to like give the number and stuff, you're like, oh no, that wasn't just a spontaneous moment. That was like 2 week buildup kind of. And I like that because, when it comes to books, it flushes out relationships better.
Yeah, and that was as far as the whole interaction with Danny, it fleshed that out, right? Because Allison had seen him sans Danny, and then she takes note that, hey, when you're with Danny, you're much more you. You're relaxed,
Yeah.
albeit, lighting black flame candles, but at least like I see the truer nature of who you actually are, and that I think works overall as far as the story.
Yeah, and I like that. And to see the dichotomy between Max, because we see it as the audience when he's alone with his family, but Allison doesn't. And I like that Allison pointed that out. I was like, no, you actually are a nice guy. You generally care for your sister. Like, when you're trying to put it on a front, it's disingenuous. But like when you're more relaxed in that way, it's like she's more attracted to that. I was like, yeah, that's what's attractive to women when men are truly themselves.
Yeah. Well, it also solved the big mystery of how did Danny know about Allison's Yabos. And
Yeah,
apparently, we got the whole thing. It was a phone call to a friend in California where they were talking about all the things
mm-hmm.
Max liked about Allison.
Allison's Jabos. Okay, I do have to ask you because this book does kind of date itself now. They're saying 1993, 2018, 2019. So like we do get specific timelines in that way. And when it comes to Yabos and Allison's breasts, now in the 21st century, also to date ourselves, do you think that reference ages well with the PC-ness? I know people are like a little bit more particular about that, but do you think like the humor and the joke still ages well?
I think it does because it was always so like far-fetched. I mean, first off, I'd never heard the word Yabos apart from like this, right? And so even in the movie, because that's what we grew up with, right? Like that was a big point of everyone remembers that moment because of how absurd it is. I mean, he chokes on his, as he's drinking the punch, he's like, what the hell, did you say? And so I don't, like, let's be honest. I don't think it's in today's day and age. Yeah. Even like, I'm sure there's guys that talk about like women's boobs and be like, oh, she got a nice rack and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, would you want that? So it's the same principle, regardless of what time frame you're in. Like it's guys speak, right? And then all of a sudden, here you have an 8-year-old just blurt it out and being truthful. And he's like, wait, totally not meant for you to be heard. It's true, but not meant for that,
Right.
So I don't
And
know. But
that's such a genuine brother sister moment too. Maybe the PC-ness doesn't age well, but the relationship between siblings still is very relevant. Like I feel that when a younger sibling is embarrassing an older sibling, and especially in front of the person that they're crushing on.
yeah, exactly. Like to me, that it brings truth for all of eternity, right? You're always going to have someone be like, hey, I think this person likes you, or like, hey, do you like him? Just being so blunt.
Yeah.
100%. Um, what was any other sort of characters within the first one that you felt were fun to be fleshed out? Like for me in particular, I loved getting into the dynamics of the sisters because right,
Mm-hmm.
they too were expanded. But just curious from your perspective if there was anything that you enjoyed.
Um, I mean, yes, the sisters too. I loved how the dialogue never changed because the dialogue in the movie is just like so one-liner, witty, funny, and like the actresses themselves just deliver them so well. Um, and so like I love that they kept the funny lines in the book, but also just their mannerisms towards each other. How they're like hitting each other and slapping each other. We see that in the movie, but we also see that in the book. But my thing was more so like you can understand like maybe this is just me now reading it. It's like I questioned why Mary and Sarah were always following Winnie. Because like in a pack of three, you have the leader, the follower, and the wannabe. That's like the general trope of groups. And Winnie's definitely the leader. But then you see Mary, she could like be smart and like she puts Winnie in her place, and Sarah's just, a diss and just jumps all over the place, and that's why we love her. But the fact that like Mary and Sarah don't ever really question Winnie. They just placate to her and follow her and do whatever they did. And if they actually gave pushback, I think we would have had a completely different result in this movie and in the story if we actually had like more challenging people towards Winnie.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly not incorrect, but I think that was part of the charm is that like if they were never sisters, like it's one of those things like I think Winnie ultimately does need them, but they don't need her. But of course the paradox of it all is Winnie wishes she didn't have them because she thinks she doesn't need them, and yet she so heavily does.
She kind of does.
Right? And so I think that's the charm of it all is that they're her younger sisters, and so by sort of default of what you imagine to be childhood torture, they don't know another way, and
Yeah,
certainly
and
we'll go ahead.
oh, sorry. Yeah, and Sarah and Mary, I mean, like they play their own vital roles too. I mean, Sarah can sing children like a siren to gather the children, and Mary can actually sniff them out. So like they have their skill set that actually Winifred doesn't have because she needs children and like she can't gather them themselves. Definitely not based on personality either. So it's like, yeah, the girls play their vital roles, but just like questioning of character. I wonder if they didn't seem like I wouldn't say antagonists, but like good foils to Winifred in the plot that they're trying to execute.
Yeah, I mean, I think even in the first movie and certainly in the book, there's a lot of reference to Mother, right? And
Yes.
so, and we'll talk about Mother because we do get her in the second part. I'm sure she wasn't the most encouraging of Mary and Sarah, right?
Oh
So,
no.
so there's that aspect. One of the scenes that I loved in the book was when they meet Master. It was so like it's a great scene to begin with, but the way it's fleshed out, I don't know. I want to get your opinion on that scene in particular.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. I think it's honestly it's more relevant and it comes with, timeliness of, the movie that came out in 1993. We had Gary Marshall and Penny Marshall who were big in comedy back in the 80s, 70s and early 90s. Like that was their height of their status, of their star status. And so like it was definitely important to have those characters in the movie, and also Bette Midler had worked with the Marshalls, so there was a friendship relationship there. So it makes no it totally makes sense why those two were in the movie. But when you read it in the book, you're like, oh yeah, it's a funny moment, and you still get the funny lines. It's like, oh, that there's a relationship between Master and these girls, but honestly, if you cut the scene out, it wouldn't change anything. But in the movie, I think it hits more.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like the reason why it worked so well in the book was because they looked up to Master and like, it gives an inkling of what hell was really like, because it expands it and it's like, oh, the fact that he remembered their names, even though they'd only seen each other once in hell, because he's so busy and he's the
From
Grand
afar.
Lord, right?
Yeah.
So I just like that aspect of like wanting this guy's approval so much, and just the silliness of it all. So I
Yeah.
appreciated it.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's like there's you can see like the lack of parenting. I guess you could say in the story, especially with Max and Danny's parents are hardly ever there. We see them once in a while, but like they're not really not involved in the story. And then when we see the Sanderson sisters trying to placate towards Satan master, also like trying to win affection from their mother, like this is what mother would do, or so it's interesting that there was more parental kind of lingering presence in their motivation in the Sanderson sisters that we don't get in the movie, which I actually enjoyed.
By the way, if it were not for that scene, they would not realize that All Hallows Eve has become a night of amok, amok,
Amok.
amok.
Amok. Yeah, I could just like hear Sarah's voice in my head and see her jumping around. And then I can also see Winnie hit her in the stomach. Oh, so good. So good.
So good indeed. Um, and yeah, so the book, like the movie, climaxes, towards the cemetery. They do the sort of big thing, and you read it out of order, but I'm curious when it happened when they open the book. obviously it's a bad thing in the movie regardless, but in the book they mention, oh, wait, Elizabeth Sanderson. So I just, when you read that, what did you think?
Yeah, that was a nice add because that definitely adds to the second story. That was a nice like setup, like foreshadowing, you can say, because now it makes you wonder because this whole first story, Winnie's always calling out to the book, like, come to mommy. And then when you hear Elizabeth Sanders' name, it was the last quote unquote owner of the book. You're like, oh, is she the rightful owner now? Is Elizabeth, I don't know, maybe it kind of goes into also Harry Potter lore, like who now has the proper ownership of, the wand, aka this book. So now you're wondering, it's like, oh, is Elizabeth the master of the book now? Or why is the book still, following Winnie? So it makes a question. I don't know. It was a nice setup to the second one, which we'll get into.
Yeah. And certainly like in those moments, right? When it is like 4 or 5 a.m., the worry of like in the movie, I'm not thinking about like, oh, her parents must think, what the hell's going on? And is she now pregnant? As far as Allison, right? So I think I like that insertion of like, holy crap, yeah, most people don't know about the witches and things like that. And so, for her to just spend the night with a guy.
Right. And also it goes to show that we don't really see Allison's parents either. We hear of them. We know that her mother used to be the caretaker of the museum, but that's all we see. And we know that the party that she was at when Max and Danny go to see her, like it was their parents' party, but you don't see the parents. So again, it just like goes to show that the parents aren't really involved so much in the children's lives, or at least for, this night of Halloween.
Yeah.
But like the presence is there, but they're not actively involved.
Yeah. Any other observations about part one before we start to deep dive into part two?
I mean, no, I just love the fact that it followed the beats and still followed the character development of, well, like why we love these characters, and like it's very consistent throughout. I'm glad they didn't change anything, but added to enhance it.
Yeah, and I will say, years ago at this point, we did a Hocus Pocus retrospective movie discussion with our sister Sarah,
Yeah.
Sarah Stretton.
We love
and
Sarah.
and so I will link to that as well for those curious, because I think it's I mean, I haven't revisited since, but I know it was a fun and lively discussion and people seem to enjoy it. So
It was years ago now. We were babies then. But I think that goes to show just how timeless this movie can be. Yes, it's a Halloween story, but it's still fun. The humor is still hilarious after years now. We're going on 30 years. Look at that now. I don't mean to keep dating us, but like it just shows that this is a fun movie to watch every single year.
and it holds up, right? Like a lot of the effects are practical, and so they don't feel dated in that way, like bad CGI might. So like, and I'm sure, they're using tricks and stuff like that, but like when the Sandersons come, like it's all lighting tricks and, just stuff a magician would use or stuff like
Right.
that, so that's why I think it is also rewatchable at any stage of life. So now, before we get into part two, just quick context about this. So the author of this book in particular is not very publicized. There's no mention of the name. You have to like really look inside the book for the name. Yeah. But it's AW Jantha. So far, from what I can tell, this is her first and only book, and it is a Freeform Books published book, which is an imprint of the Disney Book Group. And in particular, it was released in 2018, which coincided with the 25th anniversary of the movie. And this was, there was a lot of talk for a while, I remember, of like a Hocus Pocus sequel as far as a movie, and that never came to fruition. And so when I heard about this, I read this, pretty much when it came out and enjoyed it. And then when Disney Plus announced that they were having an actual Hocus Pocus 2 sequel, I was very excited. Now, as I mentioned at the top, the sequel we're going to talk about is very different than what they actually made. And part of it, I think
Right.
could be, maybe they couldn't get all the characters back. Like this book in particular is very much focused on 25 years after and with the main characters. There's new characters, but it involves our beloved Danny, Allison, and Max.
Right. And before we really delve in, I have to kind of add to it because I don't know, you might have been aware, but I definitely was a part of it. There was during the pandemic, Bette Midler, God love her because she's amazing. She got Kathy Najimy and Sarah, Jessica Parker. She got those two women to agree to make a cameo, quote unquote, for this online fundraiser that they were putting on during the pandemic. It was when the world shut down. People were like locked in their houses. They didn't want to go anywhere, and like production shut down anywhere. And that's when people were like filming stuff at home. And because Bette Midler and her star power, she got a lot of different celebrities involved in different ways to help, donate money to, I believe it's like New York Library Foundation. And it was kind of, I wouldn't say Kickstarter, but it was like people like me could donate money. And when you do that, you get a online link to the special event that was only streamed online. And because of the success of that, you had the three Sanderson sisters back after 20 plus years. We're like, oh my God, this is awesome. And that was so popular, and it streamed a few times actually. Like it was only meant to play once, but like people demanded to see it again. Because of the success, that's when Disney Plus actually greenlit properly the sequel for Disney Plus, the movie. And that's like really what kept it going when it reminded everybody, we're like, oh no, people still love Hocus Pocus. So that really helped it. Thanks to Bette Midler. I mean, goddamn, I love her. I love her so much.
Yeah. No, I'm glad. I remember that was a big thing, and yeah, just the amount of people, like the watch party when it came out,
I
you
watched it.
know. I
That
mean,
was
we
me.
did we did our own watch party, I remember. So that was a
We
lot of
did.
fun.
But yeah, that live event was super special because I was like the only one out of like the circle that I know of people who actually watched it live that night. I was like freaking out because I was so excited because I bought my tickets like a month ahead. So I was definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, I mean, anyone who thinks that this movie will not, like, forever, millennials at the very least, will keep this flame of the black flame candle burning,
Oh yeah, for sure.
and all that. So, all right, well, let's get into the sequel itself. So, unlike with the part one, this one is much more first person, which is
Yeah.
and present tense. So, big shift already.
Right. And also a perspective change from a male to a female. And honestly, I gotta admit, I didn't read the back of the cover. I didn't know the character's name was Poppy. So when I'm reading about this character who's not first perspective for like 10 pages and she's interested in a girl, I was like, oh, interesting. I can't tell if this is a woman or a man. And then we finally find out it's Poppy. I was like, oh, something's happening here, which we'll get into. But yeah, it was such a drastic change of writing style that I had to do a double take. I'm like, wait, who's speaking right now? Is it a son? Is it a daughter? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think it works overall where it gets not into trouble, but it's interesting is there are scenes with just the witches later that happen that isn't from a first person perspective. So it's like if we're gonna stick to Poppy, I'm all in, but then we kind of have this obligatory like, hey, cut to other characters.
Mhm.
So that's when it was interesting. What did you think of, overall the story itself, part two?
I think it followed the same beats as the first one, but in, obviously different elements in that way where, there's doubt. And I loved how there was still like I don't want to say I encourage bullying. I don't, but just still the elements of high school where people are insecure and they're picking on each other, and then like they're questioning like friendships and stuff like that. So you get that tension dynamic between teenagers, And then, the whole gathering of doubt and like, let's do this, where we're like, don't do that. You know what's gonna happen, because we're just conditioned that these women are gonna come back. So it followed the same beats of like, something's gonna happen. Now we have to take them out. We have like the timetable of the sunsets. Like they're only here for a few hours, so we got to do XYZ. I like that. It was easy to follow. And it's like we see the same characters like come back, but also some characters come around, and I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the strengths for me was that there was a purpose to it. The whole unresolved sort of tension between Bully Jay from the first one and Max
Mm-hmm.
makes an amends, right? And even though there is bullying, as you're talking about, Katie is the young daughter of Principal Jay, who was the bully to Max, and not only so it's all kind of resolved by the end, and certainly not that I want to start at the end, but one of the core messages by the end, as Elizabeth says, as long as there is evil in the world, the witches can come back.
Yeah. And I like that too, because it kind of sets up themselves for a third one. Like there's a possibility these witches could come back again. And I'm like, I'm for it. As crazy as it is, and like we know the rhythm of how to bring them back and then kill them again, but like they're still fun. Every time they come back, you love seeing these three Sanderson sisters together and just being crazy and foolish. But I'm for it. And the fact that like they reassure us that like, oh no, they're not truly dead. I'm like, yes, let's go again, because I love it. I love the ride.
Yeah, well, let's start with their arrival. So the whole setup is that there's this friend group of Poppy, who is the daughter of Max and Allison, and then there's Aunt Danny, who's the coolest, according to Poppy.
Yeah, Danny grows up. And I like the fact that now Danny, because it originally was like the young annoying sister, but now she's the one that Poppy looks up to, and she takes on more of that leadership heroine role, I guess you can say, that I wasn't expecting, honestly. And it added more character to Danny, because getting out of that annoying child phase is actually pretty satisfying.
Yeah. I mean, she was 8 years old, lest we forget.
Right. And I can't fault her for that. But to see a different side of Danny, I applaud that too.
Yeah. And so apart from Poppy, there are her friends Travis, who loves Halloween, but also understands Poppy's motivations, which we'll get into. And then there's the amazing Isabella, who is just a dream, according to Poppy.
Dream. Yeah. And this is where I was confused. I was like, is this a girl or a guy crushing on another girl? I'm like, all right, I like it. I'm for it. And I like that because it kind of really modernizes the story, and it like really brings us up to like today's pop culture where homosexuality is way more accepted. And I'm for it. I'm so for it.
Yeah, and Max is now a history teacher at the school, and as is the decree in all of Salem on Halloween, you always tell the Sanderson story in any history class ever, unless you're Max Dennison.
Unless you're Max Dennison. And it kind of just goes to show, like, that night with the Sanderson sisters really affected him. That like he never wants to see them again. And like, I mean, yeah, we had a positive outcome the first time, but you don't see how it actually affects him afterwards. So I was like, oh no, he has a serious disdain for these sisters. But interesting. Yeah, it just goes to show the ambivalence that Dennison like really grew afterwards, which we didn't see.
Well, because it's one of those things, like, in a way, they like save the world, and yet they can tell no one.
Yeah.
Right? Because like, who the hell is going to believe him? Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And so obvious, and that's the crux of this whole thing, is that Poppy knows the family secret of the night that took place, but of course you can't tell anybody because they'll be like, "You're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs."
Mm-hmm. Right.
But she tells Isabella.
She does.
And
Only
Katie,
to get like her.
Yes. And unfortunately, Katie the bully also overhears.
Yep.
And that's where the tension begins. Because, of course, the famous Dennison party is afoot tonight, and everyone is invited.
Yeah. I like that because that's like a standard overhearing trope, especially, and it gives the bully Katie just more fuel to the fire. And it gets her involved in the story now. Like now that we're like, oh great, now she's obligated in her way because she knows the truth, and she's one of the few people who can actually believe that this is happening. So I like that. It did, like, I wondered when I was reading, I was like, oh, how is Katie gonna get involved? And like that's her way in. And I'm okay with that.
I thought there was a slight missed opportunity to have her be a part of the calling back ritual because she's a natural foil to be like, well, just do it, Poppy. You know what I mean? Like, oh, all of it's fake, but oh, you believe in it? Do you believe in it, or do you not believe in it? So I think it just could have been that extra push. Because as it stands, I guess I'm curious to know. So, yeah, Isabella brings this like spirit board as funsies, even though
Yeah.
there's a blood moon, and Allison's like,
Like,
ripping her a new one.
he was like, speaking from experience, don't do this. But teenagers aren't gonna listen to their parents, and it's Halloween. That's when you do the Ouija board. Or whatever board that's most likely to resemble a Ouija board. Again, I was okay with it, but also I think it was more to kind of go back a little bit to adding Katie to. I think maybe it would have been one too many girls, because now we have the three Sanderson sisters, and it would have been nice to add Katie to this group that could have been three girls against the three older women. But I think maybe that would have been one too many girls. I don't know. So it might have thrown out the balance. And I think it really helps that it added Isabella and Poppy's relationship over the course of that night
Yeah.
when it was those two together.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And I mean, ultimately, she is added to the mix towards the end. And so that feels organic in that way for
Chauffeur.
sure.
I mean, like, she had the car, so yeah,
Yeah.
get her involved.
But so as they're in the Sanderson house, we have the spirit board, and then not Elizabeth, Isabella pulls out her secret that she had the spell book.
Yeah, and you're like, how did you get this? And I like that. I was like, oh, something's interesting with Isabella. Is she related to them? Is she a witch? And we do find out at the end, not to jump ahead. But I like that because you're like, oh, secrets. And like it really just adds that next level of Poppy Isabella relationship.
Did you think that she might be evil somehow, or like when you read that,
No,
what's going on?
no, I didn't really think evil because it wasn't Caitlin that was the daughter. The way that they establish Isabella, so he could say like, this is the crush, this is the woman that Poppy, the love interest, and to have the love interest turn out to be evil, I wasn't reading it in that way, because maybe just conditioned from the first one, like we know how head over heels Max was for Allison, and now we kind of have the daughter head over heels for Isabella, and I like that.
I mean, I enjoyed it. I felt it would have been a fun twist of like, oh, Poppy doesn't get what she wants.
That
And
would have been disappointing.
well, maybe she realized that Katie, was the one for her all along. I don't know. It could have.
Oh, toxic. That's toxic relationship. I don't like that. No.
Listen, they found they made amends by the end.
Yeah, they did. They did. I liked Isabel and Poppy together.
Yeah. So the twist this time is that in order for the Sandersons to come back, you have to swap bodies. And just as Max, Allison, and Danny come, boom, they are swapped for our Sanderson sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And they go straight to hell.
Like, oops, we didn't think about this plan at all. And I think that's I mean, it was unfortunate for the original Dennison group and you know and Alice and to kind of go away because it forced this new generation, these kids, to deal with this problem. Because if it was just like Max and Danny and Allison figuring it out again, then like what's the point of the daughters when we know this is now the daughters' problem? This is their conflict. I like that. It kind of broke them out of the story a bit to force um the daughter to find the resolution.
And it raised the stakes in that way, right? Now, like this time around, it's we got to save the parents, we got to save the town, because as it escalates, they swap a lot more people. So,
Yeah. And
so
that was a newer element because the whole first story is like just getting the youth from children, but now there are other there's more family involved. And the fact that now on top of trying to suck the lives from children, they also have to get the original family back. So it just added another layer of desperation and jeopardy.
yes, and where does one go when they're desperate? The cemetery.
Yeah, because that's the best place, obviously.
So this is where we reunite with our characters of Binks, aka Thackeray, Emily, who is actually named Emily Binks, and this is where we meet Elizabeth Sanderson for the first time. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
what's
I
going?
I liked Elizabeth. I liked how they added because when I said a few minutes ago, it's like, oh, there really wasn't anyone who was challenging or against Winnie when it came to her motivations. But then we get Elizabeth. You're like, oh no, Elizabeth is actually the good. Is you can assume she's like the good daughter, the one who could actually like keep Winnie on a leash per se, and who would actually have the motivation to like stand up against Winnie. And I was like, I was for it. I was like, all right, we got sibling rivalries going down. Let's go.
And as the tale goes, they also set this up in the first one. Elizabeth lives on sort of the edge of that town, in the 1600s. So when Emily went, she tried to stop Emily from going, but in her mind, not hard enough, and that's what led to Emily's death. And so she feels that guilt over that. So I do, like all things, I like that the weight of history is ever present. But of course, Emily has forgiven her. Binks has forgiven her, so it's all good.
Yeah, and I think that gave a more positive motivation for Elizabeth. The fact that she felt remorse and gave her more a better reason to go up against Winnie. Because like, no, she knows right from wrong. She has more of an ethical motivation to go against Winnie, and that's something that we never got. And I enjoy that. Someone who actually like has a conscience.
Yes. Well, this time around, unlike with the first one, they get clear instructions on how they can stop the witches. But in order to do that, not saying that it turns into a fetch quest, but it's a little bit of a fetch quest. So I think that's a distinction, because in the first one they're like, we have to stop them. What the hell's going on? Whereas here it's like, here's what you got to do. There's a blood moonstone that's like a family heirloom. Go destroy it.
Go get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's cool too because again, it's now it's like now we have a mission, we have to go get it. We don't even know where it is, but thanks to technology that like kind of resolved that really quickly. I'm not sure if I was okay with that, but you got to remember the times because even in the 90s, like they use Max and Allison use their technology, quote unquote, like radio and of the PA system to like repeat lines and force the girls into tricks and traps and stuff like that. And then we also have like the iPhones now, just today's modern technology that helped lure the women into traps. So and the fact that they use Siri to help find the stone like immediately, I was like, oh, let's go. I'm like, oh, that was too easy. I was like, if we had Siri back in the 90s, the movie would have been done in 10 minutes. Um, but like it was just a nice modernization that added to to keep the story along.
Yeah, and obviously, there's a lot that the witches themselves missed in the 25-year gap, and they certainly weren't caught up just by one night on Halloween, back in 1993. but at least they're much more knowledgeable that things have changed, right? And so they can sort of embrace that. And you know, to your point about the sisters and whatnot, like it's really Mary that figures out the phone. She doesn't fully understand it, but regardless, it was Winnie's like, you know, put that away essentially. Like, what are you doing, you ignorant buffoon? Whereas Mary's like, I think this can help.
Right.
The woman is trapped inside and she talks.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I was like, Mary could be if she was just a little bit smarter, you know, the potential is there. You know that Mary could actually take down Winnie, but she's just so aloof that you're like, oh no, that's why Winnie's the smart one. But like Mary has those shiny moments. You're like, oh no, this is something. And I do love Mary in that sense. We're like, we do need Mary around because she's kind of like the voice of the audience that will like she answers all the questions that we're already thinking.
Yeah. And it's also Sarah, it is her that sings into the phone. So they essentially use Isabella's phone to call everybody ever and sing to them. So much so that it makes social media trending and then national news of like, hey, people in Korea are getting phone calls and they're acting strange.
Yeah. And it also makes it like a more global presence too, because I mean, here in the first one, we only got really like the main town of Salem. And now that it's such a big deal, this is a worldwide thing. It just shows like how big the world got and like how expansive and how powerful they actually could be if they had the power over all the children, not just Salem, but the world. Ooh, that's a whole nother level of dangerous to these Sanderson sisters.
We're talking about three ancient hags in the 20th century. How bad can it be? Bad.
Bad. So good.
So this time around, the lighthouse is a primary setting. We revisit this multiple times, but so they try to make they kind of understand that the lighthouse has this history, and who of course knows more about the lighthouse history than Principal J, aka Bully J from the first one.
Mm-hmm.
But talk about being scarred by the past. Like when the kids visit him, he's like, no. Where's my daughter, by the way? I'm done with this.
Not getting involved here. And I like that because it just shows that like he learned his lesson and Karma's kind of a bitch in that way. But it also shows that like, again, getting the original characters back and just like adding his 2 cents. I like that. But that, you know, the symbolism of lighthouse, you know, that's supposed to be a place of safety in a place of darkness. So just the fact that they're at the lighthouse totally makes sense.
Yeah. And, you know, basically a lot happens, right? Like that's the moment where, you know, half the team gets kidnapped. You know, Isabella manages to escape because she's a dog. But of course, the witches have the spell book and they have now the Blood Moon Stone, both things that they need in order to essentially bring back, in this sense, they want to bring back Master and Mother and also start a coven.
Yeah, the whole coven, like bring back all the witches that were burned during the Salem witch trials. I was like, oh no, now we have 3 women already that are causing problems, but to have like the whole conclave, that's a big deal too. Again, adding more level of jeopardy. I was for it because we got to see different characters that we've never seen before.
Indeed. And luckily for us, Isabella the dog manages to come in, save everybody, and then it's back to the cemetery where Elizabeth figures out how to turn Isabella back into a real person. Which, by the way, I like the moments where where Poppy was able to understand Isabella the dog.
Yeah,
you know, just by the expressions.
I love the description because it even goes to show like how well their relationship was developing. Like they didn't even have to talk; they had to just look at each other. It's like, no, I feel you. I understand what you're saying. Like I'm communicating, even though we're a human to a dog. And the fact that it was a Boston Terrier, that was hilarious too, because very, you know, apropos for the area.
Yeah.
But it just shows like the relationship is cute on all different levels.
Yeah. And then So we're going to destroy the Blood Moonstone, not with a pick, not with anything. We're going to use Isabella's magic because she herself is a Sanderson.
Yeah, she's a witch.
Elizabeth Sanderson is her great something. Add in or subtract however many grades, I forget.
Probably like around 4 or 5. Yeah, I like that because it also shows like relevancy and how um Isabella is, also involved in the fact that like that gives her power, that gives her character power over these Sanderson sisters. Like now we have blood, like a blood related another sibling to worry about, especially on the night of a blood moon. So it's genetics kind of really play into the story.
Yeah, and it's the final stand at the lighthouse, by sort of the climax of it. You've got all these zombie kids and these new witches coming after them, of course, the Sandersons. But the main thing that happens is we get Drusilla the Dreadful, which is their mother. And so I'm curious, we don't get a lot of her. So I want to hear your opinion of her.
I loved to hate her. In like the best possible way, because Drusilla the Dreadful, already great name, but to see like how condescending she is towards these girls, the women on the Sanderson sisters, you're like, oh, we thought the Sanderson sisters were bad. Like, no, Drusilla is terrible. She is just like a horrible, judgmental, condescending woman. You do not want her to have power, because I was like, Winnie, yeah, she's fun, but like she's not hateful. She's fun to follow around. Yeah, she has a terrible motivation, but like she's not like the worst person. But Drusilla is like, oh no, she's a straight up biatch. It's like we don't, just as a character, we don't like her. And to see such condescension from mother to daughters, and we're like, oh, there's a whole nother level of tension, character development that did not know about.
Well, what did you think? So, because Elizabeth has a good sort of viewpoint of her mother, and that gets shattered very quickly. So that was one of those moments I was like, well, why would she think that her mother was good? Because it's, if anything, I'm much more inclined to believe that this is the way Drusilla's always been, and that's why Winnie and the rest of them are like that. So what kind of relationship did she have with Elizabeth? That's where it just could have been a little bit tighter for me.
Yeah, I can see that. I think maybe, also just the generational skips, that something got lost in translation. We didn't see that relationship develop. But, I'm okay with that, honestly. Like, yeah, maybe it just like adds more to our imagination. Like, oh, there's a disconnect somewhere. Something happened.
Yeah, it seemed like if anything, Drusilla manipulated Elizabeth because, as far as giving her the Blood Moonstone, Elizabeth thought that she was protecting it from Winnie, when in reality she was keeping it for Drusilla. So I think, if anything, my like filling in the blanks for myself, it's one of those where Elizabeth was manipulated, and not that she's stupid, but it just speaks about Drusilla.
Right. And there's also a power shift in dynamics between antagonists. Like now Winnie's not the bad one. Now we have to worry about Drusilla more. Knowing like what a terrible person that she was, like, oh no, she's the baddie. She's the one we should all be afraid of. So let's take her out.
Yeah. And good old Poppy, she gets that idea, she's gonna toss the keys as if it's the Blood Moonstone, and she's, damn it, he's tricked us again. That sort of moment, yeah.
You got to give it to the teenagers outsmarting these women over and over and over again, because it really just shows like how ditzy they are. Maybe ditzy is not the best word. Like just like how aloof, I guess you can say that they are. Like they're so gung ho about their motivation of just trying to like mortality and just trying to suck the lives of children. That's like the only thing they see. That's their tunnel vision, that they're not like so smart about everything else. They're just completely oblivious, and teenagers really go in on that and really use that to their advantage.
Yeah, and that's to me has always been the fun aspect of it, right? Dating back to the first movie of, the lighter, obviously the kiln and all that stuff. So
Burning rain of death.
yeah, so very much appreciated. But of course, it is a happy ending. Everyone returns. Um, Danny's happy. She's the rest of the family's there. Principal Jay and Max make up.
They do.
After 25 years, they're good.
Yeah, and I love that because we see the end post credit scene in the first one where Jay and Ernie are still in their cages. They're like, "Oh, did they ever get out?" And we're like, "Oh yeah, that was a mean thing for Max to do, just leaving them literally hanging." But because yeah, that sucks too for them. But I loved how they did resolve that. They're like, "Yeah, we're older. Like it's no longer our problems now. Our like." All the history between us is, water under the bridge. I like that. And it just shows like how much they've grown up.
Absolutely. So we did talk about the ending sort of at the beginning of our discussion of part two that Elizabeth says as long as their evil exists, the witches can come back. And so cut to 1 year, we get a post-credit scene, which is what I'm going to call it.
Yeah.
Where someone raises Billy Butcherson.
Oh, Billy.
What do you make of this?
I'm for it. I was like, oh yeah, because I mean they kept referencing Billy every once in a while, and to have an original character come back in that way, I'm like, all right, correct me if I'm wrong, because this sounded like there was a body swap. It was a boy who conjured Billy back up, but I was like, is it really a boy though? Now do we have a boy, like a male warlock that we have to worry about? Like we're worried about female witches, but now do we have to worry about male warlocks? I was like, oh, that's a whole nother generation.
Yeah, and especially because Billy's good. I mean, sure,
Billy's good, yeah.
he's an adulterer technically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's good. He's a good zombie.
He's a good zombie because he was against Winnie. So it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yes.
Yeah, but like we love Billy, and the fact that even Billy showed up for 2 seconds, I'm for it because it makes me wonder if this kid who conjured Billy back up is he related now? And is there another relationship that we don't know that now ties them into the storyline? I'm for it. Again, we need the third story.
Yeah, I'd be down for a third story. I mean, as I said, I think the part one is very tight because it's working off of the source material. I think part two gets a little bit shaggy here and there. Like in particular, I think if anything, I get Poppy's motivation. I think there's just too many times where it's like I don't need you to repeat this. Like I got it from the context, but
yeah.
And I pointed out a couple of things story-wise, but other than that, like I do enjoy it overall, and I would definitely be down for a third story with Billy Butcherson or whatever it may be.
Same. I was like, we love these characters. That's why they keep coming back because they actually are really fun characters to follow along. As crazy as they are, like we now know that the beasts and the structures have to resurrect them, how to kill them, and everything in between. Like it's still fun, even though now it's predictable. It's still fun to watch.
Yeah, and obviously, you would imagine, and as was the case, like a book like this was kind of panned by the critics, but it was never really for the critics. It was
right.
People who love the books with the nostalgia factor. It's a free form book, and so it's for young adults and that are discovering, yes, pun intended, magic of Hocus Pocus. And, I think it delivers on that stuff. And, was it like a New York Times bestseller? No, but it was still a good bestseller overall. So,
right. It's for the next generation. And I'm okay with that because fortunately for you and I, that Hocus Pocus came out for us. We were the kids for we were the target demographic. And now that thanks to social media, the power of Bette Midler resurging the importance of Hocus Pocus because it did become a cult classic. and just redistribution and thanks to Freeform constantly re-airing it on television, like the whole next generation are loving this story too. So yeah, this book may not be for us, but the fact that we're passing it along to the next kids, for it, all for it. Like my future kids will know the story before any other Halloween story.
And their kids after that.
Yeah.
And their kids after that.
And their kids after that.
Awesome. All right. Well, certainly there's other stuff we can harp on with this, but I think we'll close the book there, pun intended. Let's talk about books that we've been reading for fun. Marisa, you want to open this up?
Yeah, I honestly, I just started. For some reason, I got into the conversation about, Joan Didion. So I rented this book from the library. And then, of course, again, with book talk, I'm such a book talk person. I have Crescent City from Sarah J. Maas, who's rightfully now known for the Court of Thorns series. That's just like literally blazing through every young woman ever. That popularity, it's a different book series from the same author. So I'm diving into those because I don't know, it's like two completely different dynamics, but I just love reading.
Right on. Well, there was an author who contacted me, J.R. Jordan, who saw one of my posts about witness for the prosecution. And so he's like, hey, I wrote a book called Magic Time, the films and scripts of Billy Wilder. Would you like a copy? I just want to keep Billy Wilder's memory alive. And as a film nut, I was like, sure, I would love to read this book. So I have a copy of it. It's very in-depth. It is available as we speak on Amazon. And so if you are a film person, if you love Billy Wilder in particular, I think you will thoroughly enjoy this book. Then the other thing that I've been getting into is the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. We've read one of her books, well, technically two, but we talked only about one of them. And this is like the book that's supposed to be really good of hers. I don't know. People seem to love it. I'm not loving it as much, if I'm being honest.
That's fair.
And then so that's kind of that. And let's give you a preview of what we've got coming up. So first and foremost, your pick for next month is Stranger with My Face.
Yes, by Lois Duncan. It's a scary thriller, psychological thriller, evil twins and all that. I haven't read it yet, but I'm excited. I don't know why I chose this, but I think it's be a nice, fun horror kind of story for the month of Halloween.
Yeah, I'm about 115 pages in. It's good, and it's a very fun, easy breezy, but scary-ish read.
Yeah.
The same author who penned I Know What You Did Last Summer. So,
yes.
And then next month, so for November, we are covering The Legend of Bagger Vance by Stephen Pressfield. It is a golf book. It has been turned into a wonderful movie. I have not read or seen either. So looking forward to that. And then we decided to switch up our rotation. So I get December this time. So we will be skipping Christmas along with John Grisham.
Yeah.
So that's the definitive. And then I put down some books that might be TBD, but I might just read for fun. But one particular one that stood out to me is The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. That one, I'm like, that sounds, based on what I heard about it, sounds very interesting. So maybe we'll do that one. But I'll try to pre-read a couple of these before we fully make any decisions. Yeah. 2024 is so far away, and yet so not.
Right. I was like, maybe let's finish out this year strong with our fun books to look forward to, because I still haven't really decided what we're going to read for January to start us off. But I'm sure it'll be interesting, enjoyable either way.
Indeed. All right. So that's what we have. Thank you, as always, for taking the time to join us. Comment with any thoughts about Hocus Pocus. Like I said, I'll link to our actual movie discussion from, at this point, pretty much 10 years ago, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, I love Hocus Pocus. It just shows like how great the movie ages. Obviously, I have my Funko girls here, and I have my shirt. Sanderson sisters. So thank you, Phil, for still giving relevance to this T-shirt that I also bought.
All right,
I love these women. They're awesome.
We love it so much. We even attended. There was like an unofficial musical parody of it.
We did.
Where our friend Laura Thomas played Sarah, Sister Sarah, and it was really good. Unfortunately, that place shut down due to the pandemic, which is a little bit of fun that I did enjoy. So.
That was a great time. Yeah, you and I, we love story Hocus Pocus.
All right, well, that wraps it up for us. Thank you for joining us, and see you